We are continuing to follow this developing story. The Justice Department has unsealed the indictment into former President Donald Trump. Trump has been indicted on 37 felony counts related to the handling of sensitive documents. Again, these documents were found by the FBI during a search of the former president's Mar-a-Lago residence. The president is expected to be in court in Miami on Tuesday.
We want to bring in now CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane. Scott, walk us through the severity of these charges. The first 30 so charges are all about the individual files that the president is alleged to have knowingly retained, and then there are charges about false statements, espionage. Give us a sense of what is contained and what the former president is actually looking at in terms of this criminal indictment.
It's easy to get caught up in the fact that this is unprecedented, that it's a former president facing federal charges, potentially sitting for trial before a judge he himself appointed. Unprecedented, it's easy to get fixating on that. But these charges here, in a vacuum, are just so serious. Obstruction, willful retention of national security secrets. His co-defendant, charged with making false statements to the FBI. In any context, this is serious stuff, and the top-line penalty would be decades in prison on some of these charges, individual charges, and $250,000 fines on each of these charges. This is as high as the federal government goes with prosecutions on classified records. We don't see cases bigger than this, at least not often. And it is a former president, so it's not happening in a vacuum. It's happening in modern-day America in a politically toxic environment. He'll face a judge Tuesday afternoon for an initial appearance at 3 p.m. in Miami, the federal courthouse in the Southern District of Florida, the largest courthouse in the Southern District of Florida. There will likely be an arraignment immediately after the initial appearance. He's likely to enter a not guilty plea then. They'll talk about some release conditions, potentially some bond matters. But in all, it should happen in just a few minutes. Then the real work starts, the months of hearings and filings toward a potential trial, one this nation has never seen before. And at this moment, the judges assigned to this case is Eileen Cannon, a Trump appointee who, we've heard her name before, was the judge who presided over the litigation, the challenges to the search warrant itself back in August 2022. She is the judge to whom this case is assigned, at least for now. And this begins before a magistrate or duty judge Tuesday before heading to her.
And Scott, you mentioned next week is the court appearance. Why might the Department of Justice have unsealed this indictment now and not wait until that arraignment on Tuesday?
Yeah, there are two ways to do this. The Department of Justice can file a motion to unseal, which they did today, and here come the records, 40 pages or so, unsealed for America to read, or they can wait for the initial appearance in the arraignment and unseal it then. It was their choice. They haven't explained yet why they chose option A instead of option B, but I can tell you, Donald Trump announced his imminent arrest and court appearance for the world on his social media channel last night, and for nearly 12 hours was controlling the narrative to a degree about this case. Now the Department of Justice, through the special counsel, have given part of their side of the story by releasing these granular and allegedly damning details about what Donald Trump did with the nation's most sensitive secrets, sharing them with people who did not have security clearance, sharing them in areas that were not secured for the release or dissemination or even viewing of sensitive classified information. And they make a point in the charging documents to show that Donald Trump was so personally involved with what you're seeing on your screen, that he oversaw the packing of boxes, according to the charging document, that he helped arrange for the clearing of a storage room to include these documents, that he himself ordered new covers or boxes, covers for the boxes for the documents. The charging document is unequivocal. They're saying Donald Trump not only knew about the records in the boxes, but was part of organizing and planning the collection of them.
And within those documents, we know that there were highly sensitive documents, including discussions of the U.S.'s most vulnerable areas of our military, of our intelligence committee, plans for potential war engagements with other nations. Scott, given all of this, one of the things that you were discussing with our colleague Robert Costa and Catherine Herridge and Norah O'Donnell earlier was that this lays out that the problem wasn't having these documents as much as it was covering up the having of these documents and continuing to flaunt the request to bring it back. Talk to us about how important that might be in terms of the prosecution's moves forward from here, and also how it hurts him potentially politically.
And this is an obstruction case. They're making it clear in their argument here in the charging documents, the special counsel is, that he suggested that his attorney hide or destroy documents before they got to the grand jury. This is a classic cover-up case where they're accusing him of trying to mask evidence, keep evidence away from the investigators. So that's one of the components of this case. It's also something that could be a volatile issue if his political opponents choose to wield it, that you can't be trusted. You're accused of covering up a crime, not just of committing a crime. We've seen any number of statements from any number of federal political figures, Republicans calling this a political weaponization of the Department of Justice by the Biden administration, trying to knock out a Republican challenger in 2024. We noted, and we continue to note, a lot of that reaction was coming out before the charging document was released. We'll see if any of that is muted. The other Republicans running for president have been critical of the prosecution and investigation itself, not their rival for the primary, for the nomination, Donald Trump. And we've heard some Republican congressional leaders, including the Speaker of the House and John Barrasso, a Senate leader from Wyoming, criticize the prosecution, not criticize Donald Trump. The release of this indictment could change that, but there's no indication this is going to be used by Republicans to criticize Donald Trump any more than had been already.
All right, Scott, if you'll stand by, let's bring into this conversation former federal prosecutor Joseph Moreno. He served in the Justice Department in the National Security Division. So the first question, Joseph, I'm just wondering, what is your reaction? I assume you've had a chance to now look at the document, the indictment. What stands out to you based on what we've been discussing here, and we've been seeing the photographs very clearly lay out a fact pattern here that seems to answer a lot of the questions we had up until this point?
Yeah, I think Scott laid it out really well when he pointed out that this is not so much about how many documents were there and what the classification was and whether they were declassified or not. It's more an obstruction case, right? And that becomes a fairly simple fact pattern to understand. The president, former president, took government documents that he's not supposed to take into his personal possession when he left the White House. He then spent over a year fighting with the government in the return of those documents. And at some point when he's faced with a subpoena and responds through his lawyers to say, I've handed over everything, well, guess what? When the FBI raids the compound a few months later, they find over 100 more documents. And so I think we're well past any argument that this was an accident, that this was a good faith mistake, that he thought he declassified these documents and therefore didn't realize he was doing something wrong. What we're seeing in this indictment is a pretty damning set of facts to say this wasn't a good faith mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was a long period of months spent taking efforts to stymie the efforts of the grand jury, which was to recover those documents that never should have been in Donald Trump's hands to begin with. Joseph,
I'm just wondering, as I continue to look through the indictment itself, does anything in this indictment suggest why? Why would the former president decide to take documents of this nature and keep them in a place that was not authorized? I mean, is there anything that suggests...
not authorized. We saw a picture of them in a bathroom.
In a bathroom, among other places. I mean, is there anything that suggests why? I'm continuing to look through this, as I know you are as well. It's just remarkable to take a look at those photographs and understand that those were our nation's most sensitive secrets, that there were documents in those boxes that pertain to the Department of Justice, rather to the Department of Defense, to the CIA, to all of these men and women serving in the armed forces and serving in the intelligence community, charged with keeping this country safe, and those documents were there unsecured.
I mean, the first few pages of the indictment start laying out the narrative that Donald Trump was into collecting newspaper clippings and documents and kind of hoarding things in boxes as maybe mementos. It's really difficult to get into his mind and figure out why he did this. It seems like such an unforced error. I mean, here's a person with resources, with lawyers, with aides, plenty of people to tell you what you can and cannot do legally. And the fact that he did this anyway, and the fact when he probably could at many points have given these documents back and had a sort of no harm, no foul argument, like, okay, maybe I kind of thought I could take these, but I couldn't. Here you go. You can have them back. I think this would never have come to light. I think it would have been a very much negotiated return of these documents, and that would have been the end of it. So the fact that he not just took them, but then took such efforts to keep them, it's baffling why he would kind of walk himself into the situation. And the first thing I thought of last night when the story broke about the indictment was, my gosh, Donald Trump really has no one to blame here but himself.
Joseph, I want to follow up with you on that point about this being just an unforced error by the former president. Because one of the discussions is where he's talking to a fundraiser, somebody who represents a political action committee for him, and it sounds like just bragging, like, look at this document. This was related to a military operation. You shouldn't be seeing it. He goes on to say, there's the argument that that I expect to hear from the defense is that, yes, he shouldn't have had it, but he was former president. He had access to all of these things. And in all of this, it was sloppy, it was messy, and maybe there were mistakes made, but does it rise to the level of criminality when it was really just him being proud of having been president of the United States and retaining some of these little bits of honor that he felt like he was owed? How does that argument fly?
Well, I think it could. I think we probably will hear that, right, as part of the defense. I think that will be difficult to maintain when you see quotes like the one in the indictment where Donald Trump seemingly indicates he knows he shouldn't have these documents and he shouldn't be showing them to people. So I think it's going to be very difficult now to make the argument that this was a good faith mistake, because here's seemingly the person acknowledging his culpability. And so, again, you don't need to be caught sending these things to a foreign country or giving them to an enemy force. Just the fact that you willfully knew and retained them in a place that was not secure, showing them to people that were not cleared, that's culpability under the Espionage Act. And so
even if there were no negative repercussions, even if nobody then talked about it, none of our secrets went any further than the people that he talked about, it is still
thank
criminal.
Goodness. It would be a lot worse, I think, if that were the case.
But that you're saying
right.
is still criminality enough.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right.
Scott, let me ask you about the political environment now. Where does this leave Republicans? Republicans, some of whom had already made it clear that they intended to stand behind the former president. I'm thinking of the House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, even Ron DeSantis, 2024 presidential candidate, also denouncing this indictment. Now that we have the unsealed indictment itself and we have the details as spelled out by the Justice Department here, where does this leave Republicans?
Well, it's just landed, but there's been no indication over the past few days and weeks as we got to this point that any of this is changing Donald Trump's political standing inside his own party. He is an overwhelming favorite right now and an overwhelming leader in the polls as they chase the Republican nomination for the White House in 2024. He has loyalty to put it mildly, among so many Republicans in Congress, especially U.S. House Republicans. That includes the Speaker of the House and some of the chairmen of the powerful committees have been powerful Trump surrogates. Nothing, as we got to this point today, despite morsels of this coming out and reporting over the past few weeks and months, has changed the calculus. Yes, there are critics inside the Republican Party of Donald Trump, including some who are actually, challenging him for the nomination, and there are some in Congress. Mitt Romney issued a pretty scathing statement about Donald Trump today, saying he brought this on himself, this charge. But Romney has been critical of Donald Trump for quite some time. The Senate Republican leadership, that's the group I watch most closely. Senator Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, Senator John Thune, also in Republican leadership, and John Cornyn of Texas, also in Republican leadership. Senators Thune and Cornyn, in interviews with me over the past few weeks, have said they just don't think Donald Trump can withstand this and win a general election. They just don't think he's a winner in 2024, in part because of indictments like this that were looming and the other legal problems hovering over him. Mitch McConnell has been critical of Donald Trump, unbridled in his criticism of Donald Trump since January 6, 2021. But that's a minority inside the Republican Party in Congress right now. And even the challengers seeking to dethrone him and win this nomination have not seized upon this in unambiguous terms and said Donald Trump's no longer fit for office because of what's alleged here.
This is such an interesting discussion, Scott, because being well seasoned as a political reporter, you know that there is a front-facing bit of communications speech that is going to be going out from the GOP, but then there's also these internal discussions. If you are a leader in the Republican Party looking to win back the White House, what are the discussions that you are having right now?
Well, you would see an opportunity, presumably. You'd see a vulnerability you can exploit. You're running a campaign, especially a 10 to 12-way campaign where you have so many potential opponents. You look for every opening for leverage and for the ability to gain and galvanize support. Ron DeSantis, in his statements in the past few days, has been critical of the prosecution. Mike Pence, when asked earlier this week at a town hall event whether Donald Trump should be charged, equivocated for a while and then said, no, there's an opening not being taken. The political strategy may be one that they're confident in, but they're not taking this opportunity for political gain.
All right. Scott MacFarlane, Joseph Moreno, thank you both. Stay right there. We are going to continue digging in deeper as we have now seen the unsealed indictment against the former president and one of his aides.